Karoline Leavitt's invitation to appear on The Capital Hour had arrived like a double-edged sword, a chance to share her truth, yet a platform notorious for its relentless, skewed questioning. The invitation itself was curt, almost taunting in its brevity, promising a live broadcast that would pit her unyielding resolve against a host known for his probing bias. In the days leading up to the broadcast, the weight of the invitation settled on her shoulders. Every headline and every fragment of commentary hinted at the upcoming storm, a calculated onslaught of opinions ready to strip away the layers of her carefully constructed narrative. Yet, instead of faltering under the pressure, Karoline felt a familiar fire reignite within her. This was her opportunity to reclaim the narrative and confront the misinformation that had shadowed her for so long. In the quiet sanctuary of her study, surrounded by stacks of research and personal mementos of past battles, she prepared meticulously. Every note was a reminder of the countless times she'd been cornered, every highlighted phrase a testament to her unwavering defiance. The invitation had become both a challenge and a catalyst, a call to arms to expose the truth behind a manufactured controversy. The night before the broadcast, as the city around her pulsed with the hum of urban life, Karoline revisited the invitation one last time. Its crisp, unembellished text spoke directly to her, an invitation to step into the light and face the relentless tide of bias. It was then she realized that this was more than just another interview. It was the spark that could set off a revolution of honest discourse. With a calm determination, she accepted the invitation, fully aware that the upcoming confrontation would test every ounce of her resolve. Tonight, under the unforgiving gaze of live cameras and an expected audience, Karoline Leavitt would transform that invitation into a manifesto, one that boldly declared her refusal to be silenced by a system built on half-truths. As the broadcast time loomed ever closer, the studio itself seemed to transform into a pressure cooker of expectation and anxiety. The familiar hum of pre-show chatter was replaced by a palpable stillness, punctuated only by the rapid-fire adjustments of lighting rigs and the meticulous calibration of sound systems. Every technician, every producer moved with a heightened sense of urgency, as if they too were bracing for the impending storm. In the control room, where multiple screens flickered with live feeds and camera angles, Marcus Reed, the show's host, reviewed his notes with a steely intensity. His practiced smile now barely concealed the calculated glint in his eye, hinting at the biased questions he had carefully crafted for tonight's confrontation. There was an unmistakable tension in the air, a silent promise that this wouldn't be just another routine interview. Meanwhile, back in the green room, whispers and muted exchanges among the production staff painted a picture of both anticipation and apprehension. Some recalled previous episodes where high-profile guests had been cornered and provoked beyond measure, their true voices drowned by the relentless barrage of loaded questions. The memory of those moments hung heavy in the space, a reminder of the fine line between a fair conversation and an orchestrated ambush. For Karoline Leavitt, every fiber of her being was acutely aware of the charged atmosphere. The tension wasn't just a technical setup. It was a living, breathing entity that seeped through the walls, pressing against her with its weight. It magnified the significance of the invitation, underscoring the reality that tonight, every word would be scrutinized and every pause dissected. Yet, even amid the suffocating tension, there was an undercurrent of resolute determination. Karoline's mind, sharpened by years of public battles, was focused on one objective: to transform this hostile environment into a stage where her truth would shine despite the bias. The studio's ambient light, flickering softly in the moments before the cameras rolled, added an almost surreal quality to the scene. It was as though time itself was holding its breath, awaiting the collision between Karoline's unwavering spirit and the manufactured tension of the live broadcast. In that charged moment, every heart in the room beat in unison with the promise of an unforgettable confrontation, a meeting of fire and ice, of raw truth against crafted narratives. With the final countdown echoing in the background, the tension reached its zenith. Every eye was fixed on the stage entrance, every camera ready to capture the moment when the atmosphere would finally give way to Karoline's defiant stand. And in that silent, electric tension, the stage was set for what would soon become a defining moment in her relentless quest to reclaim her narrative. As the opening credits faded and the studio lights fully embraced the stage, Marcus Reed launched into the first segment of the interview. His opening questions quickly shifted the focus to the pressing issues that had been dominating the headlines. The host's tone, smooth yet piercing, steered the conversation toward the hot-button topics, controversial policies, economic disparities, and the very media bias that Karoline had long decried. Without hesitation, Reed dove into a series of rapid-fire questions that seemed designed to unsettle even the most seasoned public figures. He questioned Karoline about her stance on government transparency, the ethics of corporate lobbying, and the latest scandal that had rocked the establishment. Each query was laden with assumptions and subtle insinuations, hinting at a narrative that painted her as an opportunistic provocateur rather than a champion of truth. For a moment, the atmosphere on stage tightened as Karoline's expression shifted from calm determination to measured resolve. The hot topics weren't unfamiliar territory for her. She had debated these issues countless times before. However, the way they were presented tonight, the aggressive framing, the loaded language, made it clear that the host intended to trap her in a web of controversy. Drawing on her deep reservoir of experience, Karoline took a slow breath and began to respond. Her answers were poised and incisive, carefully deconstructing each question to reveal its underlying biases. As she addressed the issues of economic inequality and government accountability, she painted a picture of a society that demanded change, a change that could only come from a fearless confrontation with established power structures. Her measured tone, combined with the clarity of her convictions, began to shift the narrative. What had been intended as a series of provocative, divisive questions was slowly transformed into a platform for her to articulate her vision of transparency and justice. Yet, even as she methodically dismantled the host's assumptions, the tension in the studio was palpable, a tension that foreshadowed the stormy confrontation still to come. In that charged moment, as the hot-button topics were laid bare on the stage, Karoline Leavitt demonstrated that she would not be reduced to a mere caricature by biased inquiry. Instead, she used the opportunity to set the record straight, weaving her insights with a force that promised to challenge the very foundations of the narrative being constructed around her. As Karoline delved deeper into her responses on the hot-button issues, the tension on stage began to crack like a brittle facade. Just as she was articulating a particularly pointed observation on corporate transparency, Marcus Reed interjected abruptly, a sharp, well-practiced interruption that shattered the flow of her narrative. "Hold on," he snapped, leaning forward with a smug grin. "Before you get into that, can you explain how your own actions align with this so-called transparency? Aren't you just another player in the same game?" The interruption was swift and forceful, cutting through the measured cadence of her reply. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and for a split second, the air thickened with the promise of escalation. Karoline paused, her eyes flickering with the annoyance of having her carefully structured point hijacked. Yet she maintained her composure, pausing briefly to collect her thoughts before continuing. But the interruptions did not end there. Every time she began to articulate a new argument, whether it was about economic inequality or the deep-rooted influence of corporate lobbying, the host would barge in with another question, each one crafted to steer the conversation back toward his preferred narrative. His interjections came with a cadence that grew increasingly dismissive, as if her words were obstacles to be bulldozed rather than insights to be explored. At one point, as she tried to emphasize the critical need for government accountability, Reed interrupted with a derisive chuckle. "That's all well and good in theory, Karoline, but how do you justify your track record?" The question hung in the air like a loaded trigger, designed more to provoke than to seek genuine clarity. These repeated interruptions created a disjointed rhythm on stage, a jarring dance of words where Karoline's attempts to set the record straight were constantly stifled by Reed's relentless need to control the narrative. Yet, even as the interruptions piled up, Karoline's resolve remained unshaken. Each time she was cut off, she took a measured breath, her eyes hardening with determination as she subtly recalibrated her response. In that moment, the stage transformed into a battleground not just of ideas, but of control. The audience, sensing the underlying struggle between her unwavering commitment to truth and the host's calculated bias, leaned in closer. Every interruption, every attempt to derail her message, only seemed to fortify her presence further, a silent promise that she would not be reduced to a mere soundbite. And so, amidst the cacophony of interjected questions and the host's ceaseless interruptions, Karoline Leavitt prepared to reclaim her voice once more, ready to turn these breaches in conversation into opportunities to underscore her unyielding determination for transparency and justice. With the stage now an arena for raw emotion and unscripted dialogue, tensions reached a boiling point. After yet another interruption, Karoline's patience, finely honed by years of public battles, began to fray. Her eyes locked onto Marcus Reed, whose tone had grown increasingly patronizing throughout the segment. "Marcus," she began, her voice steady but laced with undeniable intensity, "it's clear from the way you're framing your questions that you have a personal agenda against my political stance." Her words cut through the ambient chatter like a clarion call. Instead of engaging in a fair discussion, you're setting traps, cornering me with premeditated bias. Every question is designed to make me appear contradictory or even hypocritical. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and charged. For a moment, the studio fell into a reflective silence as the gravity of her words took hold. The audience, sensing the shift in energy, leaned forward in their seats. The host's confident facade wavered as he found himself at the center of a confrontation he hadn't fully anticipated. Marcus Reed quickly recovered, his smile tightening into a thin line. Bias? I assure you, Caroline, these questions are simply aimed at holding you accountable, he retorted, his tone defensive yet laced with the underlying tension of a man caught in his own web. But Caroline wasn't deterred. With a measured cadence, she pressed on, accountability requires an open, unbiased dialogue, not the recycling of preconceived narratives that serve to undermine genuine debate. When your questions feel less like inquiry and more like an assault on my credibility, it's not accountability, it's bias. Her words struck a chord with many in the audience, fueling a murmur of agreement that rippled through the studio. The tension escalated further, the live cameras capturing every flicker of emotion, every flash of indignation, and every spark of determination. In that defining moment, it was clear. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It had become a battleground where every word, every challenge, was a stand against a system that had long thrived on obscuring truth behind manipulated narratives. As the exchange intensified, the confrontation deepened, setting the stage for the explosive showdown that would define the rest of the evening. The atmosphere on stage shifted palpably as the tension deepened into outright hostility. Following her pointed accusation of bias, Marcus Reed's demeanor darkened noticeably. His next move was calculated to provoke as he began dredging up controversial statements from Caroline's past, comments made in heated moments that were now repackaged to challenge her integrity. Caroline, Reed said with a cold, measured tone, you once claimed that the entire system is corrupt. Yet here you stand, enjoying the benefits of every institution you so readily criticize. How do you reconcile your words with your actions? His voice, once confident and polished, now carried an edge that seemed intended to cut deep. The question hit like a verbal slap. The host's tone wasn't just challenging. It was mocking, laced with insinuations that painted her as duplicitous. The audience, already on the edge, tensed further as Reed's inquiries became more personal, his tone sharper and his body language more aggressive. Caroline's face, already etched with the strain of previous interruptions, now tightened with raw emotion. Her eyes, fierce yet controlled, flashed with a mix of anger and disbelief. It was as if every question he fired was designed not to seek clarity, but to spark an emotional explosion, a break in the veneer of her composure. Are you suggesting, she began, her voice low and steady despite the rising tide of hostility, that my personal history invalidates my fight for transparency and accountability? Her question was both a challenge and a plea for a return to honest discourse, a call to address the real issues rather than resort to manufactured controversies. Reed's eyes narrowed. I'm simply holding you accountable, Caroline. The public deserves to know if your crusade against corruption is nothing more than a personal vendetta dressed up in noble rhetoric. His words dripped with condescension and insinuation, intent on painting her as hypocritical. In that moment, the tension on stage reached a boiling point. The exchange was no longer a balanced debate. It had morphed into a personal battle. The host's relentless, pointed hostility seemed to erode the carefully maintained boundaries of a civil conversation. Each question, each insinuation, piled on the pressure, threatening to push Caroline to a breaking point. The studio, filled with the charged energy of the unfolding confrontation, buzzed with an electric anticipation. Every viewer in the audience and at home sensed that this was more than just an interview. It was a clash of ideologies, a struggle for dignity in the face of relentless, personal attack. As the hostile questions hung in the air, Caroline's resolve began to solidify further. Though the tension was nearly unbearable, she took a deep breath, her eyes locking with those of the camera. In that charged silence, it was clear. The next words from her would determine whether the host's provocations would break her or fuel her unyielding defiance. The stage was set for what promised to be the pivotal moment of the night, a moment when every word would either bridge the gap between truth and manipulation or ignite a spark that could shatter the carefully constructed facade of the evening. The relentless barrage of hostile questions and insinuations had been building, each one chipping away at the calm facade Caroline had so carefully maintained. As Marcus Reed's provocative tone escalated, dredging up controversies and personal grievances, a palpable shift began to take shape in Caroline's expression. Her eyes, which had held a measured determination moments before, now narrowed with the sharp sting of accumulated frustration. When Reed's next question, a particularly cutting remark designed to undermine her credibility, sliced through the tension like a knife, it ignited something within her. Caroline's hand trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the podium. The quiet defiance in her eyes transformed into a blaze of raw emotion. In that instant, the weight of every past misrepresentation and every biased attack converged into one overwhelming surge of anger and sorrow. "Enough," she finally erupted, her voice rising above the host's smirking retort. The command echoed across the studio, catching everyone off guard. The stunned silence that followed was heavy with disbelief, an acknowledgement that the steady composure Caroline had long relied upon was now fracturing under the strain. Her face flushed with emotion. Caroline's eyes flashed with a mixture of indignation and heartbreak. "I've tolerated your endless attempts to twist my words, to portray me as something I'm not," she continued, her tone raw and unfiltered. "I'm not here to be your puppet, nor to validate your skewed narratives. My fight is for the truth, and if that truth makes you uncomfortable, then so be it." In that critical moment, the carefully constructed veneer of professionalism shattered. The cameras captured every flicker of passion and every uncontrolled nuance of her expression. For a brief, agonizing second, the room was filled not with the host's scripted questions, but with the echo of her unrestrained emotion, a powerful, defiant declaration that marked the tipping point of the evening. As the audience absorbed the intensity of her outburst, the host fumbled for a response, clearly unprepared for the raw honesty that now dominated the stage. Caroline's breaking point had been reached, and with it came a promise that she would no longer allow herself to be cornered by bias. In that moment, she reclaimed her power, and the interview was never the same again. The studio fell into a stunned silence as Caroline's final words hung in the air, a declaration that cut through the carefully constructed narrative like a sharpened blade. For a long, heart-stopping moment, even Marcus Reed seemed at a loss for words, his smirk replaced by a look of incredulous shock. The cameras, which had been trained on her every move, now captured a figure who had transcended the role of a mere guest. In that electrified moment, Caroline's eyes hardened with a resolve that spoke louder than any retort. Without waiting for another interruption or a chance to be cajoled back into a scripted dialogue, she slowly rose from the podium. Her chair scraped sharply against the stage floor, punctuating the gravity of the moment. "I refuse to be part of this charade any longer," she declared, her voice trembling with raw emotion yet ringing with unwavering authority. With that final statement, she turned her back on the stage, her determined stride leaving the set as quickly as the silence allowed. The live broadcast captured every moment of her storming off, the brisk pace, the firm set of her shoulders, and the unmistakable fire in her eyes as she made her way backstage, leaving a stunned audience and a floundering host in her wake. As the studio crew scrambled to fill the void, and the audience reacted with a mixture of applause and murmurs of shock, Caroline disappeared behind the heavy doors of the green room. Her departure was not just a retreat from the immediate confrontation. It was a bold, uncompromising stand that signaled she would no longer allow herself to be manipulated by biased questions. In that decisive exit, she had not only reclaimed her narrative, but also ignited a spark of defiance that promised to resonate far beyond the confines of the studio. Within minutes of Caroline's abrupt exit, the fallout was palpable both in the studio and across the digital landscape. The live broadcast, interrupted by her storming off, had already ignited a firestorm of reactions. Social media platforms exploded with real-time commentary, and trending hashtags dedicated to her defiant stand began to dominate the conversation. Viewers who had watched her last moments were quick to applaud her courage, hailing her as a symbol of integrity in a media circus of manipulated narratives. In the studio, chaos reigned. The production team scrambled to recover from the unexpected disruption, while Marcus Reed's flustered attempts to regain control only fueled further outrage. Clips of Caroline's final words and her resolute exit circulated rapidly, prompting a cascade of opinions from pundits, political activists, and everyday citizens. Comments ranged from fierce support, finally, someone standing up to bias, to scathing criticism from loyalists of the network, who dismissed her actions as a dramatic stunt. News outlets seized on the incident, with breaking headlines proclaiming, "Karoline Leavitt walks out on biased interview." Analysts debated the implications of her departure, framing it as either a brave reclamation of narrative or an irresponsible abandonment of a platform. The polarized responses underscored the deep divisions that had long plagued public discourse, as every comment and retweet further amplified the resonance of her defiant act. Within hours, the uproar reached a fever pitch. Live streams, opinion pieces, and heated debates dominated both online and on air, turning what was meant to be a controlled interview into a catalyst for a broader conversation about media bias and the power dynamics inherent in televised debates. For Karoline, the immediate public reaction was a vindication of her decision, a clear signal that her refusal to be cornered was not only understood but also fervently supported by a significant segment of the populace. And as the storm of public opinion raged on, one thing became indisputable. Karoline Leavitt's bold act of defiance had set the stage for an even larger battle over who truly controlled the narrative, and in doing so, she had become an emblem of resistance against a system that many believed was rigged against honest discourse. In the hours and days following the explosive exit, the reverberations of Karoline Leavitt's defiant stand continued to ripple outward. The immediate public reaction had transformed the incident into a media frenzy, but as the dust began to settle, the longer-term fallout painted an even more complex picture. News outlets and talk shows alike dissected every moment of the confrontation. Editorials and op-eds debated whether Karoline's walkout was an act of genuine protest against manipulation or a calculated move designed to capture headlines. While some pundits argue that her departure underscored the inherent bias of the network, others questioned if such a dramatic exit would ultimately undermine her credibility in a polarized media landscape. On social media, the conversation evolved beyond simple support or condemnation. Online communities rallied to her cause, organizing virtual town halls and live streams to discuss media ethics and the power of unfiltered truth. Memes, hashtags, and viral videos celebrated her stand as a call to arms against entrenched bias, with many sharing personal stories of feeling similarly marginalized by mainstream narratives. Within the studio, the fallout was just as tangible. The network faced mounting pressure from advertisers and viewers, leading to internal debates about journalistic integrity and the ethical responsibilities of the press. Marcus Reed's reputation, too, suffered as critics questioned the tactics used to provoke Karoline, turning him into a cautionary figure in discussions about media conduct. For Karoline herself, the aftermath was a mix of vindication and reflection. In private interviews and on her own digital platforms, she reiterated that her exit was not an act of surrender, but a necessary rejection of manipulated discourse. Yet she also acknowledged the personal cost of such a public confrontation, a reminder that challenging systemic bias was rarely without sacrifice. As the days turned into weeks, the incident sparked broader conversations about the future of televised debates and the responsibilities of both hosts and guests in fostering honest dialogue. Activists and thought leaders began pushing for reforms in media practices, inspired by Karoline's unyielding stance. And while the immediate storm had subsided, the ripples of her defiance continued to influence discussions on transparency, accountability, and the power dynamics within the media. In the quiet moments that followed, Karoline Leavitt reflected on what had transpired. The fallout had been both a personal catharsis and a public catalyst, a reminder that the battle for truth was far from over, and that every act of defiance carried the potential to reshape the narrative. And as the world slowly adjusted to the new normal sparked by her bold exit, one thing remained clear: her voice, now even more resolute and unfiltered, will continue to echo in the corridors of public discourse, challenging the status quo and inspiring others to demand a more honest and transparent conversation.